Many of you already know Glenn. You saw him briefly in that little film teaser a second ago. So he's a participant in the work of JD's documentary series, the Mega series, which started out as a 2-hour film and has now turned into a 40-hour mini series. And so I think that what we're again today, building on a lot of the ideas of yesterday, we're continuing our pursuit. Into the inquiry. I'm not going to pretend that anybody has the answer to anything. What we're really trying to do is find the right questions to ask, and then see where all that leads us. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Glenn Roberts of Anson Mills and let him take it from here.
Good morning. Nice to see you. Hi. There's a lot of recurring themes so far with all of the speakers. I think the first one that I need to probably relieve everyone's tension today about the fact that I did not bring 3 pairs of pants. Right? That's a start. Which would go with a crop rotation. One of the things that I think comes out of all these discussions today and yesterday is what's growing in those wheat fields if you're supposed to lay out 3 years between wheat crops if you just think about what's there. Is it there? Yeah, it's there. Everybody see that's wheat? What's the other food? We don't talk about it much, right? If you do that over and over again, anybody ever read Gun, Germs, and Steel? Gun, Germs, and Steel. Read it? Start with hunter-gatherer forager, come into barley culture, William. Go on up, Esativum, Esativum. You're up there, and you burn the soil up, and you can't fight anymore. There goes the civilization, bye, bye, bye. Barley's the bye-bye, right? How many people know this? Besides William. Oh, you do, good. How many farmers are in here? Seriously? Uh-oh. Well, that's what I am. Catherine, could you stand up? This is Catherine Schoffer. We used to build hotels and restaurants together back in the day. We've been in business together off and on, almost 35 years. And in this particular business, almost 20 years. The person that is not here today, and if she's watching, which I bet she isn't, but is Kay Rentschler. And the 3 of us are the kind of people who get into mischief at Anson Mills. There are 50 plus more people directly involved in Anson Mills than other 100 or so farmers, just so you know. Why I say that? Because nobody does this by themselves. I think if you look around at inspiration for what Catherine and I wanted to do almost 20 years ago now, people in the room. Frank, I remember Frank Carollo from Zingerman's, Zingbake. I remember our discussion clearly. It was an epiphany a decade ago easily, where you were saying, this is what the market is. Here's the price points in the market. I wonder if we could do a local loaf, artisan style only. I wonder where the price barriers are for that. That was 10 years ago. And that, maybe you probably don't remember it, but I do. And with William, because I used to ride horses in another life and hit a lot of trees off those horses when I got pitched, William breezed by this yesterday talking about horse breads. And then he's up here smashing crust, right? And he said, and they used to do this for horses too. And I rode horses for a long, long time, and I never, ever saw anybody do that for a horse, but I'm going to try it. Because the horse, seeing a human being beating crust off of a loaf of bread, then giving it a horse, you'd have the horse for life, right? And that's really what you want, because they can kill you, right? They're bigger than you are. They know more about getting around than you do. And if they don't like what you're doing, you are on the ground. But the other part that goes to this field for the other 3 years. Sometimes it was 4. You know what we do? We're rice people, right? In Texas, we fight for 4-year land. It doesn't exist. We don't want disease. We don't want the rice to crash. So what do you do for the other years that you're not growing wheat unless you want your civilization to blow up in your face? So these are the discussions I had with William a long time ago. And he kept telling me I was crazy, and he was right. The casual remark, he said, I went through all your websites, and by the way, pretty much not correct. That was true of everything I was thinking before I met William, okay? And with Chad and JD, well, JD was an interesting case, because when I met him, he neglected to tell me he was working with MIT and Harvard and Yale on a project. And Chad happened to be there. We're going, who is that guy, right? Because we just thought he shot commercials, right? And here we are 5 years later, and JD knows as much as all of us. Sort of scary, actually. You know what? I've never seen JD make a loaf of bread. Mike Calante. We need to get JD and make him make us a loaf of bread, okay? Which brings up another thing. Mike Calante, you can't do this without scientists. I guess everybody here knows this. Anybody want to disagree with that before we get started? I can't do it without scientists. Let's do it that way. Our neighbors are scientists, because William made this really clear yesterday. We're flatbread eaters, even though this culture is a subset of a subset. I want to make sure everybody knows that we eat pizza. And if anybody tries to tell me differently, they're wrong, right? So if we're in flatbread culture, which is what JD said, stuff on top of bread, right? Then the definition of pizza is up for a lot of introspection, which we don't have time for today. But someone like Mike Calante and someone like William Rebel, who are working maybe in 2 different disciplines, come together on one very important fact. There is bread fashion. William asked me this morning if it's geographic. Maybe, but since we're all pizza eaters, really, no. But there are interests, and you can be curious. That's who we are. And when it comes to people like Richard Miskovitz, who used to tell me way back in the day, probably don't remember this, that farther back in history you go, the higher the hydration, brings up things like, what is bread? It is that which you can drink. Nobody's mentioned bread whiskey yet. Yummy, yummy, right? No, but we have bread beer. Beer made out of bread's good stuff, right? Bread, not the grain to beer, but bread to beer. Is anybody working in bread whiskey yet? They used to. The thing I'm finding out is, 1, I don't know anything. And the more I learn, the more I don't know a thing. And 2, that we're missing whole sections of even American food, let alone global food. So when you try to think about fashion, you're left with things like Mike Calante would say, approach it with an open mind. So today, I'm going to dump some facts on you. Beep, beep, beep. You hear the dump truck coming? I'm going to dump some facts on you as fast as I can go. I hate doing this, but what happened, I got stuck at Logan Airport for whatever reason, I don't know, for 12 hours. So I said, okay, I'll pop out some ideas for today. And I was thinking Peter's parameter, which was Glenn, 17 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever. And I said, okay, I can do that. I got done about 8 hours just writing crap. Started editing it, fell asleep twice, right? And I said, how am I going to keep you guys awake, right? It's called My Eyes Glaze Over. Mago to the PR pros in here. That's, I don't know how to do this, so I'm just going to do it. You'll excuse me. If you fall asleep, punch the person next to you, because these are facts, and then we're going to play. We're going to talk about the future. You ready? And again, I apologize, but I couldn't figure out how to do it. It went from, I fell asleep at about 1 hour and 15 when I was doing the first edit. I fell asleep. And I went, how am I going to get this down to 15 minutes? Because Peter said, if you can do it in 15 minutes, then it'll be open for QA. So, Stefan, right? I'm going to do QA only after doing all this stuff. But even I have something that comes from Stefan's presentation. So everybody that's presented so far and who is coming, I'm trying to touch on everything because we're talking about the future. As Peter said, this is about vision, not my vision, our vision. So, very quickly, why the hell am I standing here? All right, Anson Mills has been around for 2 decades. We've grown our own landraised seed, farmed that seed in organic production, and milled those crops to order. We distribute our landraised crop ingredients to pastry chefs and chefs worldwide. We cold mill at -10 and process by hand, cryogenically under CO2 envelope, like the pharmaceutical industry. That process was invented here in Carolina, right? I was talking to Stefan and Wolfgang and Paul about the Thule mill, which was the original Carolina patent for conical milling. Came right from here, okay? I learned all about cryogenics not the way somebody that's smart would learn, in Appalachia. In winter, decades ago, the best mill goods were just harvested, new crop, milled fresh to order, small batch, hand processed, and then immediately put into culinary or baking applications, or hooch, which is really where I learned it, right? Following this process, we mill whole, viable, new crop organic landrace grain, and legumes, and oil seeds, which cover a lot of plant classes. So we produce 115, 120 different kinds of plants in production for lots and lots of different ingredients. 60% of what we send to chefs and pastry chefs worldwide, that's our market, is custom. So if a chef or pastry chef thinks it up, we'll try to do it. I think Mike Clowney knows we can produce almost anything. Oh, Steve Jones said the sum total, you don't know this, Mike. Steve Jones said, the guy that runs the bread lab, the sum total of all the work I've done, he tasted it for the first time and thought seriously for 2 minutes about spitting it out. Right? So, I guess being edible, Williams, part of this, whether you're poor or rich. Okay. When we mill these things cold under CO2 envelope, we immediately vac pack them, send these ingredients the same day they're milled. So we start just like anybody would be milling straight into ferment. Instead of going straight into ferment, we chill vac pack this stuff and pop it on a truck and it's gone. All right? And now, today, we're popping it on a refrigerated belly container and it's going to where? Singapore? Yeah. So that even happens occasionally. Since Joe Lindley and Caroline started me out on all this stuff, it's their fault, right? Their family's been milling since 1690. It's really been a long trek. Told Joe this morning, it was so hot in the combine, the air conditioner went out Saturday afternoon. I passed out when I got down from the combine to try to fix the compressor. So farming is real. And that's why my name is Tractor Donkey, and Catherine's, my partner's name, is the smart person, right? So, to do all this, we manage 600 seed acres in rotation. See that? So 3 gets us 200 acres, and 4 years is only 150 acres, and we lose about half of it. Right? That's 4 years, so we don't disease up. Right? We have dozens of small plot seed farms for geographic biosecurity, and over 50 organic production farms totaling only 1,800 acres. So those of you in the professional stuff knows this is a gnat on anybody's scale, but it sounds huge, right? Part of what we do is work pro bono, onshore and offshore. We're grant giving, not grant seeking. We don't take debt, which is something I'll cover in just a second. Our average organic production acreage is 35 acres per farm. We learned to adapt quickly the hard way our first year when we lost a 30-acre field of heirloom maize in a freak thunderstorm. And then for a year, we didn't even have that corn that we told chefs was fabulous. That's not a good thing to do. We learned to replicate and spread farming over a wide geographic area to avoid catastrophic loss. We also learned the hard way during our first 2 years of farming that we were required to establish peer review histories from William, who said, hey, whatever you're writing down there, that's crazy. You know, need to go read. It's called book farming if that's all you're doing, by the way. Book farming doesn't feed anybody. Right? From year 3 to 8, we learned that exceptional flavor and texture is the only thing that gets what you're doing into someone's mouth, period. That's a tough rule. That means the last thing you did, no matter who you are, is what you're judged on. This is just like being a chef, isn't it? Or a baker, right? So it's the same in farming. Over the last 12 years, we learned that the entire pre-industrial system that we worked on, and I went out to visit Frank on this, and Ari, and Paul, and everybody was really helpful on this because I wanted, against Catherine's instincts, to build places all over the United States called ants and mills. I actually went out there with this thesis and presented to Ari, and Ari's going, I think this is crazy. And Frank's saying, I don't know, this might work. And Catherine was saying, there's just no way, right? And so instead of monetizing it, we decided to do it pro bono. So Catherine and our team, we're on our 15th grain hub so far. And that grain hub is working. So we think that this might be a model for future development. We're actually maybe on the 16th. Anybody here from New Orleans? Because that's starting right now. Grayson Gill, we all know who this is? Yeah. He and Alon Shaya are thinking about doing it. And what we do is go in with the people who are standing up that want to do it. Out in LA, it was Travis Latt and Alex Weiser and John Hammond. And up north, it was William that actually brought everybody together with Paul Bertoli and Robert Klein in San Francisco. It was, frankly, I think it was your idea to do it that way, right? So over the time, the very first one was with Amber Lamke, who's not here today, up in Maine. Oh, you are here? Oh, hi. How you doing? So it was post-harvest infrastructure and Harry Records, right? Harry here, who owns Harry Here Farm in Exeter, who had a perfect clipper 4-deck or 5? 3? It was perfect. It was showroom clean from the, I don't know how old it was. Do you? 1920s. It looked like it was sitting there. All the fittings were bright and clear. All the paint was perfect. The varnish was perfect. And he had a screen set with it, too. And he said, I don't want this anymore. And I knew Amber was cranking up Somerset. So I called her up and said, you know, Harry's down here. He's got this mill. And he's got a lot of stuff. You might want to come take a look at it, especially the cleaner. And that actually started everything. And Amber's thinking was big in all this, too. So I'm here copying off a lot of smart people, and I think if you add it all up, I've been copying off the smart women more than the smart men. Don't ask me why, but it's true. Okay? I don't know what that makes me. So after our first seed harvest, this is the one thing why I'm here today, really, what I wanted to say. After our first seed harvest, we learned to avoid monetizing seed. Everybody I've worked with starts to go there. They want to privatize this stuff because the American industry model is such that now we have Terminator technology, so if you're a farmer, you've got to go back to the well all the time. this isn't good for the long term. I can guarantee you it won't work. All the geneticists I work with, and I work with lots of them, all of them are saying it doesn't work. So they say it about 20 years before we actually start doing something about it, unfortunately. Right now we're working on problems in pathogens, glyphosate, all this stuff that geneticists were worried about 20 years ago. And the information just keeps unfolding more and more. A nice idea would be, how many scientists are here today? Got 2. We have how many? I suggested Andrew Ross, and I think that one of the things we don't do, because we're in more of the arts, since I was in the Thomas Keller level cooking sphere with Catherine back in the day, what we don't do is that we don't go to scientists enough. We keep thinking, well, they made this mess, so why go talk to them? But it's interesting, William, the first thing he did was start reading everything from science, right or wrong. And you got to be prepared for things to be wrong. If William were saying this, he'd say the same thing. You have to be prepared to be wrong. Or if you go to somebody like Mike Calanti, he's going to be telling you if he's ethical, and most of the people I work with are excellent human beings. They have that kind of inner moral clock. And I get beat up by scientists all the time because I'm ebullient and I get really excited and I want to do stuff. And they're going, you're just nuts. Just calm down. Here are the facts, right? Here's the results. So what do you want to do with this, really? Stop with the romantic crap. And if you don't have that check, then you go off into these rabbit holes and you don't come back. And there are a lot of failed enterprises in my sphere, including farming. So that's the next level. We don't monetize seed. Scientists are our neighbors. 150 years ago, all of Joe Lindley's neighbors kept seed. And if you needed seed, you go down the road and get it, right? And then you pay it back. Nobody was exchanging money. And Joe's family's been around long enough to actually chronicle this stuff, 1690. There's some nice history, right? Go down the street and get some. Go down the road and get some. Go across the creek and get some. We don't have that now. So scientists are the neighbors we don't have. The more of us that try this, maybe we'll end up with some neighbors. We do a lot of seed exchange now since we don't monetize seed. Obviously, there's a lot of people that want seed. It's free. If we tried to monetize it, I'm not sure any of this would have worked to begin with. But in retrospect, it just didn't seem right to monetize it since it was in the public domain. What's wrong? What? Okay. So, we're rice people. Yeah. So, all of us at Anson Mills, in keeping with the neighbor thing, are rice people. We're Geechee in Carolina and Georgia Sea Island parlance. This means rice with every meal. We're place-based and identity preserved at Anson Mills. We care because rice breads based on extinct polycrop ingredient philosophy in hundreds of forms from our pre-industrial era are extinct in our culture today. They were around for 200 years, and there's lots of reasons. We farm because of this. And we think the future's bright. We lack community farms in the South. We planted the least amount of winter wheat since 1900 this fall. That's Wall Street Journal, February. Our grain trade in industrial culture dropped from 65% share in 1970 to below 30 today. Last but not least, we have fewer farms today than we had in 1850. Right? What does this mean for bread bakers? I think that first understand why anybody would sit here and tell you that something that yields a half ton an acre instead of 22,000 pounds an acre is something to study. So would I say, if you have a 350 bushel an acre wheat farm, are you going to then transition out tomorrow morning to something that's yielding 60 bushels an acre? And the answer is no. But instead of that, I propose an idea that Mike Calanti has been working on with a few others. Steve Jones is working on it. Peter and Harry Piamoller working on it, which is the idea of multigrain. But we tarted that up, like so many other things, after the Industrial Revolution. What about the idea, instead of that picture, what about putting a bunch of plants out there? William yesterday was talking about horse breds. How do you get the highest horse speed? This is ancient. Horse breds, because I rode horses and we did this, you can hot a horse up on purpose. It's like them taking drugs, only the drugs are really good for them, right? As opposed to what we know about drug abuse. So you can get the highest horse speed comes out of the study, as William said, of English horse racing that impacted us. And with the advent of this study, we went through this entire bred culture once in the 19th century. And it was only the automobile that stopped this farming. It became super elite and in horse racing only. Prior to the advent of the automobile, everybody were playing these games with their horses. They needed better power in the field. They'd do it to donkeys and mules, right? How to get more mule power. So I take that notion and say, take the social injustice, take social reconciliation, and think about what bread could be in the future. What's in that field makes a difference. Clover culture under that wheat in a field, a lot of people think is organic. A lot of millers, a lot of people in Europe, when they started doing clover culture, didn't like the flavor of the wheat. I say we put all the stuff we do in long rotation in the field at one time and cut it. That means doing shocks and then stooking them into those pretty picture things we see. We invented things to do this. They're called reaper binders, so we even have machines that do it. And letting it all cure. There's a lot of evidence out there, both nutritionally and other, that that's a different food than straight machine wheat, because your ripening windows and your osmotic uptake all even out. You get a higher flavor and aroma profile in stook wheat than you do when you just machine it. So I propose we think about that. I propose we think about wheat in the culinaria and the pharmacopoeia and the herbal as one thing. I think we expand bread to the notions we've had in the past beyond what wheat bread is, what the French model is. I mean, we're still thinking poulain. How long since World War II? Really, what's driving our whole culture. This will drive William crazy. What Mike Calanti says, open your mind up. Taste, think, look at forms, look at texture. But there's one thing that you can't deny. We need biodense acres, and we need biodense bread from those biodense acres. One of the things that's happened in the last 100 years or so is we have disappeared the notion of triage. Most people, if I put a gun to your head in this room and said, give me a definition of triage, might have heard it with regard to war, conflict, catastrophes from weather, catastrophic events with eruptions, whatever. Triage is what people associate with medical recovery, but triage in agriculture means separating after harvest. And it's as old as the pounding camelina stations next to the emmer ovens in Mesopotamia. They came up here, didn't they? Talk about fighting. And you heard Chad mention the idea of einkorn. Einkorn in Bard in 1906 was a thriving crop. That's Bard, California, by the way. These aren't new. They've all been here before. The Salzburgers came into the South, codified everything that had gone on in the Sicilian exchange in the Fertile Crescent, and brought it straight to the Carolinas and Georgia. The breads made from that are maybe some of the best breads ever produced in America, period. Right? And when I say bread, I mean all kinds of bread. It started with wafer wheat. It wasn't, white Lamasse was wafer wheat. It was associated with Jesuit culture. The Salzburgers were playing off the factors that were Jewish and Sephardi. So you saw that direct reflection of those cultures in our early farming. We'd like to get back to that. We'd like to try to get bread to become something it hasn't been. I do have one note for all of us, William. Pea flour, if you look at the elite multi-crop mixtures, you end up with the equivalent of white Lamasse wheat in the legume classes, which actually impacts sweetness and broaden flavor profile. Those were for wealthy people. So you look there against the horrible stuff that poor people were forced to eat in Europe, and here too. And you think about slaves and what they were doing in their hidden gardens here. And by the way, Stefan, here's one for your records. It's called Workins. Have you ever heard that? In the South, sourdough is Workins, W-O-R-K-I-N-S. And it's in a little pouch. And it ended up being the sourdoughs as a standard. It was Native American and African technique of carrying sourdough from place to place. Workins. The good bakeries weren't center bakeries. They were only there, the center bakeries, the urban bakeries in pre-industrial South were there to avoid fire. So there were massive bakeries with all kinds of different breads. In the country, it was slaves in the cookhouse. They didn't write, this isn't recorded, but the best bakers in the country were slaves. They were doing all the baking. And they had the grain right at their hand, and they were milling, they were keeping the seed, and they were doing the whole process. There's a lot of white people that looked at that and said, oh, this is great, right? But they didn't know what they were looking at, feeding William's thesis that we look at something and we may not understand it. But here it's workins, and those workins lead to a biodense system where flavor equals nutrition. If it's pre-industrial and it is managed from antiquity by hand for nutrition, where people can fight wars on this stuff, flavor becomes a hallmark of nutrition. If the flavor is very high, the nutrition is there. You have transformations beyond that, so don't just stick with standard ferment. In pretzel culture, and we were talking about doing nixtamal, right? Dip it in lye. Interesting. What else? Germination. We have a whole industry where Peter's been working on that for a while. They're all coming together. Guess what perfect bread is? It's made from a perfect acre of all those foods that you don't see in that picture. And guess then what perfect bread can be? Highest nutrition. If you get a perfect acre, means good tilth, good roots, understand what's going on. If you do 20 bushels of wheat, 10 bushels of legume, 10 bushels of oil seeds, 10 bushels of oats, this, that, and the other thing, you have a multi-grain field. That's easy to think about. So go out and ask your people to plant a little plot of stuff all mixed up and see what happens. You can hand harvest it selectively, or in machining, you can punch stuff in, drill it in, seed it in sequentially, so that the days to maturity for ripening the crop happen all at the same time. You can actually machine this. We do it. We have 6 seasonal polycrop flowers. The nutrition, it's not my imagination, although I'm not peer-reviewed and I don't have to be. Yes, right? It makes me high to eat that stuff, right? I can see its impact on other people too. Just like a horse, I get high. I get excited, right? I feel like running. Flavor equals nutrition. Flavor equals medicine, equals nutrition, equals biodensity, equals harvests that match these 200 bushel an acre things, but it's not just one thing anymore. It's an entire spectrum of nutrition. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks. So we have a little bit of time for questions. I think the takeaway, the big word takeaway as we're building our vocabulary, polycrop. Many of you already know that word. I think it's going to be a major word, in the next couple of years when we'll be hearing more and more about. I know that Harry P. Mueller here at the school is working a lot with your polycrop and making breads, learning to make breads from it, and having a lot of fun with that. And we maybe even be having some polycrop product today at lunch. So, questions for Glenn? And I knew that when he said, I can do this in 17 minutes, I just said, yeah, sure. That's plenty. Yeah, go for it.
in 17.
I said, if you can do it in 17 minutes, that'll be great, knowing that it would take a little longer. But yeah, question. All right. Say it loud so I can get it.
Well,
What is he rotating his crops with outside of the wheat?
yeah, so it's simple. Everything, any plant class from below the soil surface in heights, so we can sequential cut too, right? We started with sequential cutting because we had oats this tall, rye that tall, and wheat under the oats. It just happened in a contaminated field. I'm going, right? Well, if I take combine high and cut the oats off, then I can come back and cut the rye off, then I can get the wheat. And we started there, and then we noticed the next year that soil, the biotics started to take off. So we intercrop. I think we've done 14 intercrops, but I don't know whether Mike Calante's actually tried in that flower, and I don't think Harry, here's the difference. Mike Calante, Harry came to the field to look at this stuff because they said, well, that's wacky. You know, what is that? And I think Harry saw a 9-element polycrop, which had 2 kinds of wheat, emmer and einkorn, buckwheat, 2 kinds of buckwheat actually, a Hokkaido and a Tartary out of Maine. It had flax, because it was a winter field. It had winter sunflowers. People don't know there are, but there are. It had, I'm missing something. Where'd it go?
Well, let me ask
Yeah, go ahead.
So you have a workhorse field, right? Probably one where you're growing 35 acres of one type of wheat. When you harvest that, how are you putting nitrogen back into the ground?
We don't monocrop.
Okay.
We grow multiple crops. We grow understory crops with our wheat, even in just regular stuff. All these wheats are up here, right? So down in here, we've got leguminous and phosphorus-fixing crops and all kinds of stuff. I mean, we're in the old farm journals for this and have been producing seed out of that system for at least a dozen years.
So
yeah.
It begs the question, though. How can you feed the world in this way? Where does it lead? Is it scalable when we've got billions of people to feed?
That's a great question because my daughter, who now just moved to Santa Cruz, that was her first question, and she's been in everything and seen everything we've done. That was also Catherine's question. Is this practical for the future? And the answer is, of course it is. If you've got a 160 bushel an acre average field, and in the south it's much below that for wheat, and you took all the elements and put 20 bushels of 8 things in that same 160 acre field and build tilth at the same time, and then have a full spectrum food coming out of it that's also delicious, why not do that instead of the monocrop? That's where Chad's going. If you stop and think about what everyone here is thinking about, if they actually have to own up to it, we want to feed ourselves first, right? The debate changed from starvation to obesity in the last 20 years. We want to feed ourselves, then teach people wherever to feed themselves, to grow their own seed, like you're doing, right? That red fife, that's killer, right? To take it to the market and say, look, this tastes better. Now what do we do?
But we're doing a mass growing, and then we're trying to get nitrogen back into the ground. So we're crop rotating. We're not doing
Yeah, well, you can rotate. This all starts, we originally, when we pulled this up with the scientists we were working with, we were calling it zero rotation. And Pat Hayes and Andrew Ross at the Oregon State University said, well, that's a dumb term. It's just polymorphic farming. It's like, it's been around forever. This isn't new. African milpa is one. Native American farming that shows in milpa culture is a second one. The African sun cycle system is another one. Anywhere you have massive pressure and you have to have biodensity, you see these polymorphic farming systems come to the fore. And they triage them afterwards to make injera breads and this, that, and the other thing in Africa. And so if you look very carefully at these cultures, it goes back as far as you can think, because even wild einkorn, which isn't actually einkorn, has a polymorphic system to it. It doesn't grow as a monocrop and wasn't domesticated out of a monocrop.
I
You can harvest levels. This is where I started. I had a field that was contaminated. It was a mistake. Joe would know this. Joe doesn't want rye and wheat together in a shipment, and neither do I, frankly. But I had a field where I had persistent Roman culture rye from the 18th century that I'd been playing with, and it was so robust it came back the next year inside my oat crop that also was contaminated with some wheat that I was working with. It was because I'm a bad farmer, right? So I admit it. You know, Steve Jones said, "What the hell are you doing?" I said, "Planting stuff." He said, "That's not scientific." I said, "I don't want to be scientific. I want to eat good food," right? If that's scientific, then I'll be scientific. But until somebody tells me I got to stop, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. So it was a mistake. But then we said, well, hell, cut it. Let's see what's going on. I can't sell it for feed. Geez. And so I said, we'll eat it, right? It's only, you know, it wasn't a big field. I think it was 20 acres or something. So you have to be careful. If you start growing a bunch of different cross legumes out there, you're in trouble. So you have to know genetics, and there's where I get to go back to the dunce chair with the dunce cap, and the scientists weigh in. I send them the routines. I say, hey, what do we got? Where's our exposure here? What's our cross potential? Which goes to Chad's statement. He went to study with Anders Borgen, who does mass population genetics, whereas a lot of these ideas with John Letts, William, and other people who've been looking at this, where the Brewsters, beer, barm, and bread Brewsters, they did it all. They had more than 200 different wheat varieties in one field, and they were managing that seed before the guilds hit. So Lionel's here. He's a guild baker, right? I don't know where he is, but he's right there. So when the guilds hit, they bifurcated the brewing, the barm, the yeast, and the other culture, and the bread. But before that, the Brewsters had it in kelp systems all the way back to the Fertile Crescent. It was all one thing. So you got liquid bread, my favorite, by the way.
So a lot of lunch conversation between you two guys, I hope. We had time for one more question. Let's get it over here.
I mean, my original question was that you were just, are you rotating crops or are you not rotating crops? So it sounds like you already answered that. So now my question is kind of building on that is you're doing all of this poly fields with all the different plants. So now are you going to be focused on like crafting that? Like last time we did this much oat and this much, you know,
Like the ideal blend, the ideal balance.
Terminology, but
Well,
like, are you looking at doing that kind of crafting to build certain flavors or different flavors or make things special? Because that's kind of what people.
In other words, scientific.
The answer is the peer review guys are already doing this. There's one right there, right? And the yeast people are already doing this as well. So I'll give you one to get us out of here. What is a yeast time machine? Think about it. If you've got a polycrop field not like that one, what's a yeast population over a polycrop field of all 17th century plants looks like? What is that yeast? You go out and collect it, and you're going to build a levain from it. What does it look like? Is the population different than the yeast population over that field? Is the yeast on the grain and the bacteria on the grain going to be different? And my answer is, it is a time machine, and we can look at perfect levain culture in this previous eras by replicating the populations of the things that used to grow without what William says, tarting it all up with outside notions. I'm the outside notion guy. I don't have to peer review my stuff, so I don't have to answer to anybody, but we have a foundation. It's full of scientists, and I work with scientists all over the world. And when Peter asks me an honest question, I have to refer him to a scientist and or guarantee I give him an honest answer. That's hard. I usually worry about geneticists jumping out of the crowd, but lately with William's presentation, I wanted to say this today, I'm going to start worrying about streakers.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Love it. Thank you. All right. Beautiful. Lots to, there's about a half an hour now for you to continue to chat, talk about this. Grab Glenn if you can, and the other speakers, talk some more about these ideas that have been floating around. But of course, the visionaries don't have to be scientific. That's what makes them visionaries. Then the scientists come in and then they make it work. So this is what. So I love that we're talking a lot today about the visionary aspect of things.